everyone, and welcome to the third of our best of 2017 podcasts, and this time we're going to concentrate on the best books. And I'm joined by Vikki Reilly of Birlinn and Polygon Books. Hello, Vikki.
Hello.
And thank you very much for doing this.
That's all right.
We are recording this in Lighthouse Books, which is a fantastic independent bookshop in Edinburgh. You know this well. Tell us a little bit about Lighthouse.
Well, for 20 years, the building that we were in was originally owned by a woman called Elaine Henry, and she had the bookshop called Word Power.
Yeah.
And it was a radical bookshop.
Absolutely.
In the sense that it championed marginal voices, books about feminism, socialism, politics, and writers that don't get sort of mainstream attention. And then sadly, Elaine decided to retire. Not sadly, I suppose, she's off to the south of France. She's probably having a lovely time. And thankfully, the wonderful Mary has bought the building and the bookshop.
Oh, wow.
I knew Mary previously from working with her at Toppings Bookshop.
Okay.
So I was delighted to hear that she bought Word Power, and now she is making it her own into this lovely Lighthouse Bookshop. And the great thing about it is that she's carried on the ethos of Word Power. It's still very much a radical bookshop that does pay attention to all the same things that Word Power did.
If you love your books and you love bookshops and you're in Edinburgh, then definitely come and pay it a visit.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the marvellous thing that they also do is they support a great charity called Street Reads, which collects books from donators all around the city.
Oh, fantastic.
And gives them out to homeless people so that they can, carry on reading books and still be involved in culture.
How brilliant.
I know, it was great.
Excellent. Street Reads.
Yes, Street Reads.
We'll check that out, definitely. Put a link to that. So we're going to talk about the year in books and some of our favourite ones, and it's fair to say it was a good year for Birlinn and Polygon, Scottish Publisher of the Year, 2017. So how was your year in terms of working for Polygon?
I mean, it was a challenging year.
Yeah.
And because it's also our 25th anniversary this year, so it's kind of nice to be awarded this honour in our 25th anniversary year. We weren't expecting it at all.
Right. You didn't have your speech ready or anything like that?
Well, this is the thing. Usually a whole bunch of us go to the Saltire Awards, but also you hear in advance if books that are shortlisted have won, and we hadn't heard anything back from the Saltire, so we just assumed that we hadn't won anything that year. So on the night itself, a lot of us just dropped out to go, and we're like, actually, I'm feeling a bit tired. I won't bother going this year, but have a great time, have a canopy on me and all that kind of thing. And then I actually even stayed and worked late, and then I got home and I just sort of, rocked up on Twitter just to see what the chat was on the hashtag and all that. And then the first thing I saw was Birlinn wins Publisher of the Year, and I was like, wow!
Wow, who's picking it up?
I know.
You're getting into your coat.
Yeah. Luckily, Hugh and Edward and two of our lovely interns were there, so there were people there to sort of give a lovely speech and all that kind of thing. So yeah, we were quite stunned in a good way. Yeah.
Well, and I think it's a great recognition because, as you say, 25 years to have survived that long going is fantastic, and probably a good recognition of the work that's happened over those 25 years. Because
that's the thing. So many of the books that we've been doing since the 90s. A lot of them are still in print.
Yeah.
These are books that are standing the test of time and will probably still be read in a couple of more decades' time, because, one of the great things that Birlinn champions is voices and stories from across Scotland that maybe might not be picked up by the more mainstream publishers.
Sure.
Particularly, Highlands and Islands stories. And they resonate, of course they resonate. They tell the story of the country. We have a truly national conversation in the books that we publish, so it is just. It is just,
and it is, I've picked up many new writers through books which you've published, and as you say, often from areas of the country that, more recently haven't had the attention that they deserve. So it's been a years of highs and lows, I think, in Scottish publishing. Mm-hmm. But I think mainly looking back on it, mainly highs. There's been some really the rise of 404 Inc. I'd like to talk about, particularly the collection Nasty Woman, which just seems to have grown into this phenomenon.
Yeah, it's been so lovely to watch from the sidelines as well. I remember just in the new year when they started crowdfunding for Nasty Women, and I was like, I'll put some money towards that. And then and you were just like, I hope they make it. I hope they make what they want to earn for this book. And then it just grew and grew and grew and grew, and Margaret Atwood getting on board and all that kind of thing. And you were just like, this is phenomenal.
But again, I suppose it was stories, or at least people's personal tales, which hadn't been aired before. You had to go and work to find them. And here was something that was actually by word of mouth and by social media reaching people, and the feedback was nothing but positive as far as I could see.
Yeah, that book completely hit at the moment that it needed to hit, and it just took off. And I think it's great that two people in their bedroom can create such a wonderful story, and just to see it develop over the year as well, you know, all the events that they've been invited to, and even just the success of the other books that they've been doing as well.
I was going to say that. I love the fact that they seem to be, to me, putting out the books that they want to do.
Yeah, like, I must admit, when you know, I saw what was happening with the Nasty Women book, and I was like, oh, that's going to be hard to, you know, keep up with that and all that kind of thing. But then you saw what happened with Hings. Hings has sold really well. And again, it was just they hit a market that isn't normally represented in bookshops, and they are in the space where the conversation between those people happen, you know. It's quite telling that a lot of these books, like your Nasty Women's and your Good Immigrants and No Place Like Home by J.J. Rubola, all these new publishers that are coming through and doing these books that are from voices that aren't normally heard, they're all doing it through a completely different publishing model.
Yeah.
And I think that says a lot about what the standard publishing model and the standard publishing world, they should really be taking that a little bit seriously.
Oh yeah, without a doubt.
Yeah, because, you know, the trend in books over the last few years has been that fewer books have actually been getting sold, but more expensive books have been getting sold. So it kind of tells the story that the book world is in rude health, but actually you can see that tells you that the market is shrinking, and that people are only interested in a market of money and a market of the book as a lovely object and all that kind of thing. I'm not entirely convinced that's a sustainable model for...
I think that's right.
You know, I understand, you know, with the growth in digital and all that, that's how the book world went. I understand that, you know, going back to production values and the book as an object was a sensible thing to do in one way, but it can't be the only thing that you do.
It's very similar to what happened with music, and the resurrection of vinyl was partly so people could have this quite expensive, as you say, you know, £20 or more for this lovely bit of vinyl, which is as much to have and look at and put on your shelves like your books in the same way. But people are still making music which is just being heard digitally or you know, through people sharing on social media or whatever, and it's difficulty moving from that, the new voices or the new songs or the new writers, to getting them into people's hands and getting them read.
I mean, you hear so often, oh, young men don't read, and then you see the sales figures for Chris McCreer's book, and you're just like, I'm not entirely sure that's the case.
I was talking...
We're just not being catered for.
I was talking to Sam Best, writer himself, but he teaches at a school in Glasgow, in North Glasgow, and Chris came and did an event to his, I think, third year English class, and it's the area that Chris is from, so they knew the references in the streets and, you know, to even the fish and chip shops and all that kind of stuff. And he said it was incredible to watch this class, many of whom, I'm not a reader, you know, it's not for me, suddenly engage with this voice that they recognised and understood, talking about places and people that they recognised and understood as well. He said there was a huge connection, and they all... they were asked to do short stories afterwards, and he thought, maybe some of them won't take it seriously, but they all did.
Brilliant.
Which is fantastic to hear.
It's the same thing when you go to an Irvine Welsh event. They are not like any other book events that you go to. The audience is completely different. The atmosphere is completely different.
Yeah, he gets heckled, which very rarely happens.
And you just think, why does this have to be a one-off case, you know? So yes, I'm glad that people like 404 Inc. and, you know, the people behind The Good Immigrant and, you know, Crystal Mahay Morgan is doing things that they're doing.
Absolutely. This was probably the previous year, but I want to talk a little bit about Graham McCrae Burnett's Booker win, because that, again, was a great success for a Scottish independent publisher to have that kind of success.
I know. That was such a great story. I remember being at the Saltire Awards last year when he won Fiction Book of the Year. And he really got quite emotional, and you could feel the whole room behind him. And just, I mean, I'm even getting goosebumps just thinking about it now, just because there was just such a wonderful feeling that somebody who is really talented, who has just, you know, who wrote a book like as he wanted to write it. You know, it is an unconventional crime story. It was just brilliant, and he is really talented. I remember seeing him at the Scottish Book Trust Emerging Talents thing years ago.
That's
you know,
right.
when the Book Trust get mentors and all that kind of thing, and he was performing at the showcase, and I just knew, I was just like, yeah. He'd already been signed by Saraband by then, but I was just like, ugh. Why did we not see him before?
But again, it's the willingness for people to publish the unconventional and the different still has a place and still can, you know, have huge benefits.
And I like it when crime fiction like twists itself a little bit, you know, because a lot of people talk about genre and kind of people kind of look down a little bit on crime sometimes, unjustly, I think, and especially when crime does and can do such interesting things with storytelling. And he completely did that with
I have to admit, I've become a crime convert in the last 2 or more years, because I just really, apart from when I was young, I used to read a lot of crime fiction and stuff, and I kind of not bothered, read more literary. I mean, it's ridiculous, because, you know, His Bloody Project is an incredibly literary rich book, and so I read that, and I read Graham Laroney's book as well at the same time, and it was being promoted as crime fiction. I went, well, there's obviously a lot more going on here than I thought. And then I started to kind of read a lot more people. And in fact, I'm reading Charles McGarry's at the moment.
Oh, are you?
Yeah, I'm not just saying that because you're sitting here. I really
Charlie
am.
McGarry is one of ours, folks. The Ghost of Helen Addison is his debut that he brought out this year, which is done really quite nicely for a debut.
A great character right from the start. Very different character.
Yeah, Leo Moran is, he's not your usual grizzled...
He's a bit of a dandy, which is right up my street.
I want to go to dinner with Leo Moran.
But I think you're right. I think, you know, as I say, I remember talking to Karen Campbell about her early books and how they were promoted, and it was very much the way that a lot of crime was being promoted at the time in bookshops, I guess.
Well, that's the thing.
Black and white cover, the, you know, shadowy figure, the same font, and, you know, you could hardly tell one apart from the other.
I think that's one of the reasons why I don't read as much crime fiction as other books, because, you know, what I like to do is I go up to the fiction section, I start at A and I go to Z, and I'll pick up as many books as take my fancy. And then by the time you've got to Z at the end of the fiction section, you've already got a handful of books. So you're just like, well, I'm not going to go to the crime fiction section because I've already got like £100 worth of books. But no, do you know what I've been doing this year with crime fiction especially is audiobooks.
Ah, right.
So what I do is I download an audiobook, put the headphones on, get my tracky bottoms and my trainers on, and go for a big long walk with a crime fiction book blasting in my ear.
I do that with podcasts, including your own, but we'll talk about that later on. The only thing about that is you've got to watch when you're crossing the roads. Because if you think the traffic is on the audiobook, you could be in trouble.
One of my favourite ones that I listened to this year was Aber Mukherjee's A Rising Man.
No, I don't know.
Do you know what? He's from Glasgow.
Okay.
But he's not published by a Scottish publisher. And he has written these historical crime books set in the 20s in Calcutta.
Oh, wow.
So it, as well as it being, you know, a murder to solve or whatever, there's also, you know, the hints of politics and colonialism and you know, post-World War One malaise with the main character who was in the army, who you would think is completely dyed-in-the-wool establishment person, but he has been disillusioned by the First World War, and yet he goes over to Calcutta, height of the Raj and all that. It's really, really interesting. I would highly recommend that.
Okay. What was the name again?
Abur Mukherjee.
Definitely look out for that.
Yeah.
You have your own highlights of the year in kind of publishing.
Oh, well, can I just list the books that I wished Birlinn had published?
Yeah, go for that. That's excellent.
Well, another fiction book which I haven't got round to reading yet, but I'm very jealous of the sales figures, is Mary Paulson Ellis's Other Mrs. Walker.
Right.
That's everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's Scottish Book of the Year for Waterstones this year as well.
And that's another name who you've seen places over the years, and it's great that her book's doing so well.
And again, it's like that. There's a mystery at the heart of it. So the elements of what people can enjoy from crime fiction, but it's not just a straight procedure. It's that element of taking a mystery, adding a little bit more of a literary twist to it. So I'm looking forward to getting around to reading that at some point. The other book which really took off and was everywhere this year that I wish Birlinn had published is the Bothy Bible.
Right.
Oh my God. We are truly sick for not publishing that book. Wild Guide. They're a publisher based down in Cornwall or Devon or somewhere down south, and they do these beautiful travel guides, and the Bothy Bible was one of them. And again, I bet you the sales figures for Christmas this year are going to be skyrocketing as well. So, yeah, that's one of the books that we wished we'd published.
And is that a few writers having done that? Or is that some?
I actually don't know who the authors are. Mm-hmm. I just always refer it to it as the Bothy Bible. But it's just that the travel guides that you would normally think that books like that really would die a death with the advent of the internet and all that kind of thing. But what the travel guide industry has done instead is, again, create something else with travel guides and make it into a sort of, bothy porn, travel porn, where you're just,
a bit like cookbooks have done over the years.
Exactly, like
instead of having the recipe, it's the picture almost that's the most important thing.
Yeah, I mean, we did something similar with our Paul Merton Hebrides book, and we're going to do something similar with a book by Bridget Benson next year on the North Coast 500 route, called North Coast Journey.
Oh, wow, good.
Yes, very excited about that. And what's the other? There's a couple of history books that I wish Birlinn had published as well, which probably haven't got as much attention as they deserve, maybe because, again, they're not Scottish publishers. One is the Sarah Fraser book on Henry Stewart. There was actually a TV documentary about a couple of weeks ago, and Henry Stewart was Charles I's older brother.
Okay.
So he was actually the one that was supposed to take over, the throne.
Yep.
And he was trained in all the arts and crafts and physical things that you're supposed to be trained for to take over the throne. But unfortunately, he died just before he died before James I and VI died. Mm-hmm. So Charles was sort of elevated into the throne unexpectedly.
So it's a bit like Prince Andrew or Harry coming through.
But by all accounts, he was much more cultured. He was much more worldly. He was much more savvy politically and all that. And you just think to yourself,
what difference?
What a difference it might have made to the whole history of Britain if he had actually made it to the throne. So it's by Sarah Fraser, and I've not read it again because I'm a skinflint. I always wait until the paperback comes out.
Quite right.
And the other one was a book about David Hume called The Infidel and the Professor.
Oh, fantastic. Which
was a beautiful book. Again, it was Princeton University Press. So again, it's not going to get that much coverage over here.
And often they're very expensive.
Yeah, well, that's another reason why I'm waiting for a paperback to come.
I would read that. I'm interested in David Hume,
Yeah, even the ebook of that book is like 20 quid. You're just like, oh, okay.
Yeah. It's difficult. And I know from a few people who've been published at University Press, it's frustrating for them as well, because there is a wider readership out there. It's not just for people...
and especially the design of it as well. It's got beautiful covers, really well produced. I think it deserves a trade readership.
Oh, hopefully.
Yeah. And the last one that I wished Birlinn had published I've not got around to reading this one, but it's Loki's book, Poverty Safari.
Ah, right, interesting.
Yeah, I'd really like to read his point of view on his life and what it means and how we can go forward with the way politics represents.
Do you know who's published that? Because I don't.
It's Lewis.
It is Lewis.
Yeah, so it is still a Scottish publisher. Yeah.
Excellent. Oh well, that's definitely one to check out.
Yeah, he's. I find Loki interesting. I know he's quite controversial, and a lot, and I don't always agree with him, and I don't always agree with the way he sometimes expresses himself. But I like the way he is willing to explore what he thinks about things so publicly, and willing to make mistakes, and learn from them. Or not, or whatever.
Yeah.
But I like the fact that he's unafraid in the way
There's an honesty in what he
yeah.
did, how he presents himself.
Yeah.
It was the same with his music, I think, and live. If you see him live,
I've never seen him live.
Well, I think in my experience, he'll often, divide an audience even
Yeah.
then. But it's because he'll say what's on his mind.
Yeah. I like that sort of unsafeness about him.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Yeah, danger.
Yeah, that's a better word.
We should touch upon, I said it was a good year, but it also has had its downs, and the kind of demise of Freight is one which I just feel incredibly sorry for the writers who were caught up in it.
It came out the blue. I think that's what the thing is. Sometimes because the book world is quite small, you hear rumblings of things if
Things aren't going well.
But this one just completely came out the blue.
Yeah.
And it kind of stunned us all. It stunned not just other publishers and the writers, but booksellers as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
People that had really championed Freight and were excited by having another independent publisher in Scotland.
And the books that they were publishing this year, the ones that they did and the ones that they were due to, great books, a lot of new writers, some of whom luckily have been taken up by other people, some who unfortunately haven't. And
not yet.
Not yet. There is still possibilities. Of course, you're right. You're absolutely right. I enjoy your positive view on these things. Well, let's hope so.
Yeah.
Because there are really some great books. Some of which I read and reviewed on Scots Whay. But
Ever Dundas's book is a debut that, again, I've not got him to read into.
Well, I can tell you it's fabulous.
Yeah. I saw her during the festival at Blackwell's reading from it, and just all the reviews and everything. I was just like, I can't remember another Scottish debut getting those kinds of reviews since Jenny Fagan's Panopticon.
That's an excellent comparison, because there is a similar, not maybe in terms of style, but there's the same kind of care and what's the word I'm looking for, kind of positiveness coming out of it from difficult situations. Fantastic central character, one that you just want to go with and you really root for, and it's complicated enough that you don't just get the one story, it goes off in different directions. It's a tremendous read, and Saraband have republished that. So
is it out now?
It's out now. Yeah, I saw it in Waterstones in Glasgow.
Has it got a different cover? It's
the same cover,
right, so.
but if it's not going to, it'll be around for a while anyway. And it won the first Saltire first novel, didn't it?
Yeah. Because one of the things that I'm really interested about it is the way it depicts the World War II in a less than sort of rose-tinted, nostalgic way. Because we're so used to hearing about the Blitz and all that being the good old days in some sort of weird way. And especially reading Muriel Spark at the moment, and having read books like Elizabeth Bowen's In the Heat of the Day. Is that the title? In the Heat of the Day? In the Heat of the Night? Is that the Sidney Poitier film?
In the Heat of the Night is the Sidney Poitier film.
Right, it's Heat of the Day then.
Yeah.
And just the undercurrent of violence and the constant sense of anxiety and that must have really been there. It wasn't all sort of knees up Mother Brown in the shelter and all that kind of thing. So yes, I really want to read Goblin very soon. And
the great thing is it's seen through a child's eyes. Someone who has read some fiction themselves and turns that fiction, H.G. Wells references and Frankenstein references, trying to make sense of this world where there's bombs going off and there's people are dying and people are going missing and animals are dying, which, you know, it's...
I didn't know that story
Yeah.
about the pet deaths or the... I didn't realise that there was a whole big cull.
And what's incredible about the writing in it is it takes you a while to work, because Goblin's young voice is so unique, and the things that she sees and the way that she sees it, you have to kind of work your way through it, and only then you go, oh, that's what was referenced to. You have to kind of go back and go into it. Oh, it works on so many levels, and yeah, it's one of my favourite books of the year, and I highly recommend it. And yeah, we'll hope that there's a lot more kind of happy stories come out of the demise of Freight,
Yes.
definitely. So you've talked a little bit about the books you wish you had got around to. What about books of the year? What have you been excited about this year?
Well, my favourite Scottish book of the year is This Is Memorial Device
Oh, good, because it's mine as well.
by David Keenan. We were both at his event at the
We
book
were,
festival,
yeah.
weren't we? I took it on holiday with me to Birlinn. I went to Birlinn. I thought this is an appropriate book to take to Birlinn.
It is.
Even though This Is Memorial Device is set in Airdrie.
But it almost paints Airdrie as Berlin
Yeah.
of the kind of 80s, doesn't it? You kind of expect Lou Reed and Iggy Pop to turn around the corner.
Yeah, and I get probably like Goblin. I mean, it does take a little bit used to getting into the
very
narrative voice and the way it, you know, it's different voices at once, and you're kind of like, and you're a bit confused as to which character's saying what thing, and so you have to, you know, turn back and all that kind of thing. But once you get into it, and just the accumulation of all the different voices and all the different stories, it's really good. Like, it's so inventive. There were so many great quotable lines and brilliant passages or individual stories from some of the individual characters that made you laugh and want to cry at the same time because of the sheer audacity of all these people doing such amazing, crazy things in Airdrie in the 80s when, you know,
it was bleak times for most
Thatcher's
of us.
Britain and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, I admit, I started reading it and I went, I'm going to have to start this again because I don't know where the hell it's going. And I did, and then you got to get into his voice and the different voices, because there are many different voices. And it's just so thorough. You get anthologies, you get discographies, you get huge index. I mean, an index like you've never seen in your life. And you just go, wow. And then we did a podcast with him, and it kind of all made sense.
To it, yeah.
Because he's got a mind that goes at 100 miles an hour.
I know, I like that. I like people whose brains go in fireworks in all different directions, but at the same time they seem to be able to coalesce their ideas into something that sounds right and proper.
Absolutely. Well, can I talk about someone else who's a little bit like that and who you published, which was Stuart Cosgrove's Memphis 68,
yes.
The Tragedy of Southern Soul, the
Yes.
follow-up to Detroit
yeah.
67, yeah. I loved the first book. I love this book, and it's incredibly deep and detailed about a time in America's history, and taken in a year where you've got, you know, the death of Martin Luther King, you've got at the beginning the death of Otis Redding, and how that affected.
Oh, that chapter makes me cry.
Oh, it is. I can't wait for the next one as well.
Yes.
And if you're interested in American history, but American music as well, because he does look at the music. There's great references. If you want to get deeper into your soul music, it's a fantastic reference.
Because he does speak about, you know, the big superstars. You know, in Detroit, he talks about all the massive Motown.
Yeah, Detroit's about Motown, isn't it?
Yeah.
And the politics.
And Memphis
of
is
the time.
about Stax, so obviously Otis Redding is in there and all that kind of thing. But he also talks about all the sort of more little known people. You know, like the story of that's in the Catherine Bigelow film in Detroit about
which I didn't make the connection, but yeah.
I didn't know about that story until I read Stuart's book before I watched the film. But yeah, Memphis 68. I always have a soft spot for all the music books that we do at Birlinn. So, you know, whenever a new music book comes, you don't really have to ask me twice whether I think it's a good idea to publish or not. And particularly, as being such a sort of 60s geek as well, to do a book on 60s music and 60s soul music, and to do it with Stuart's energy and passion and commitment, and he's such a great authority on the subject. Yeah. And you can tell that even from a 5-minute conversation to reading a whole book that he's written.
Yeah.
You know, his knowledge is astounding.
And I think he wears it quite lightly. He's not trying to bombard you with all of this
Yeah.
information. There's narratives and I think he's a great writer. He's a storyteller, exactly. And the stuff, other books he's done with you, I think are similarly great stories,
So Harlem 69 will be coming out next year.
Yeah, get your orders in.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't wait for it. And that's it, isn't it? It's a trilogy.
It's a trilogy.
Yeah.
But, there are other conversations being had.
Yeah. Because I think some people, hopefully not people that listen to this, but some people maybe know him still best as, football pundit on Radio Scotland and perhaps the work he did with Channel 4 and things like that. But he's a terrific writer. I mean, any of his books I recommend to pick up.
Me too.
Yeah. So what else have you got to say your books of the year?
So after this, I've not read this yet, but this is gonna be on my crime audio odyssey, which I'm leaving for the Christmas holidays. So I'm gonna go on a big walk in the Christmas holidays.
It's a major run.
And listen to Denise Mina's book.
Okay.
Yes. The Long Drop. I always get mixed up and call it The Last Drop. That's a pub.
Yeah.
The Long Drop.
It is.
Yes, and because again, it's that mixture of truth and fiction, and the way she's the way she writes it as well. Because I was really pleased to hear that she won the Gordon Byrne Prize, because he's a writer that I really love as well. So I kind of associate it now with Gordon Byrne, which makes me even more intrigued to read it. One
book I was wanting to talk about was James Kelman's short stories. That was a shiver, because I'm a massive Kelman fan, but I do love his short stories. I think there are a few people better when it comes to doing those.
I've not read the new one. I've never read one of Kelman's collections cover to cover as well. I always just dip into them.
But that's fine.
So I can't even tell you which.
Yeah, they do all become a bit of a blurb.
Yeah.
Not while the gyro and Greyhounds at breakfast.
The Byrne or the Good Times.
Yeah, there's loads of them. But they should all be checked out, and it's a good point, actually. Yeah. They are books where you can dip into these stories. You don't have to read them one after the other at all. No. The whole point, not the whole point, but one of the points about how he writes his fiction is that you kind of join a character partway through, sometimes mid-sentence even, and then you leave them in the same way, and you've got a little snapshot of someone's life that has gone on. And I'm just so glad that he's continuing to write. And actually, with this and Dirt Road last year, is doing some of his best. And do you know what? Most relaxed fiction that he has for some time. Yeah,
I think. Well, I can't possibly comment on why that is, but I'm glad it is happening.
Yeah, me too. I don't know either. I don't know whether setting it in Dirt Road in America, because he's had novels in America before, but that book, there's the relationship between the father and the son, and there's loads of music in it, and there's something about that. And in the short stories, there's a lot of music, there's a lot of humour, there's always humour in Kelman.
There really is, and he gets a hard time.
He does.
People just always give him this sort of dour reputation, where there is a lot of humour.
But it's often quite dark humour.
It is dark humour, but
in this story there's some more upfront gags, not gags exactly, that would be ridiculous. But it's actually a really good place to start, because although you've got the big back catalogue of stuff, I think his short stories are a really good introduction to one of the best writers about, without a doubt.
Yes, absolutely. And talking about one of the best writers that Scotland has produced.
Yes, excellent. Great segue.
To segue in there is the wondrous Muriel Spark.
Oh yes, let's talk about Muriel.
I know. I am headlong, deep in love with Muriel Spark at the moment. Yeah. I'm so thrilled that we are getting to be the publisher at the centre of the Muriel Spark Centenary project. It's underway now. Yeah. 2018 is her centenary year, but we've started off our publication of all 22 of her novels, and the exhibition at the National Gallery, National Library, has opened.
I'm hoping to see that maybe this afternoon.
Right, okay. By all accounts, it's very good. I've not been yet myself.
Well, it's a good friend of mine, Colin McElroy, old Colin,
Oh, do you know him?
So I'm sure it'll be fantastic.
Yeah, the pictures that I've seen online already look really good, and I really want the poster.
Yeah, I'm hoping they're selling the posters as well, which is ridiculous. But no, the poster looks fantastic.
Yeah, so a lot of work has been going into that throughout this year in the background in secret. We've not been allowed to talk about it for so long.
I remember meeting you at the book festival and you said, I've got a secret to tell you, but you can't tell anyone else. And my lips were sealed.
I know. It was so hard.
It was burning.
Yeah, because, at the time I was visiting bookshops, selling in Birlinn's wares and all that kind of thing, and I couldn't talk about it. And, I visit all the bookshops and all the booksellers love Muriel Spark. There's very rarely a bookshop that you'll go in and one of the booksellers is not a massive Spark fan. And I couldn't say anything. So that has been part of the challenge of this year, is doing our own publishing schedule, but also doing all the work behind the scenes for getting the Muriel Spark Centenary Edition project up and running. So we've released the first 4, so that's The Comforters, Robinson, Memento Mori, and The Ballad of Peckham Rye. And we also released, by Alan Taylor, who is also the series editor of the Centenary editions. He's done a really lovely memoir.
Yeah, he was a friend of hers, wasn't he?
About his friendship with Muriel. They met in the early 90s, maybe 1990 actually. And they just hit it off. They became friends, and he visited her house in Arezzo loads of times over the following years, and was also the person that accompanied Muriel on all her sort of international bookish adventures. So it's a really lovely memoir about his friendship with her and his appreciation of her work throughout her career as well. And so, because I must admit, I shamefully had only read Crime of Miss Jean Brodie by the time this project came up. So I've been on a crash course with Muriel.
Well, that's fantastic.
It is, and it's especially like the latter half of this year has really been dedicated to Muriel, and it's kind of no other writers are coming close.
That's the problem when you get kind of one of the best. Then it's a lot to live up to that.
Yeah. So we're doing our podcast on Muriel Spark this month too, which will be coming out soon. So we're doing The Comforters for that one. But I decided, for some strange reason, I don't know why, I thought in my head that I should read Muriel Spark's books on young girls' careers in publishing before reading The Comforters.
Right.
Because that's what she was before she wrote The Comforters. And even though she wrote those books after she wrote The Comforters, I thought it might give me a sort of flavour and element of what her life was like before she wrote The Comforters, which has been an interesting way to do it. Because she wrote Far Cry from Kensington and Loitering with Intent a fair wee while later on, like maybe late 70s those ones were released. I'm not too sure of the chronology. And Girls of Slender Means was just after Jean Brodie. And it's been interesting to note the differences in tone and generosity between the later books, where she's maybe she's got a lot more hindsight now, and the Girls of Slender Means. And then reading The Comforters just now, I've not quite finished it yet. It's so good. It is so... For a debut, I cannot believe the command and the confidence of that book for a debut novel. And
that's one of the things about her writing, is the confidence of it all. There's never any doubt. I mean, right from the beginning through to things like The Driver's Seat, which is it's a crazy book, really. This is what I'm going to write, and I'm going to write it in this style, and... She seemed to have confidence in her own ability right from the beginning. Yeah. It's so great to read. Like sometimes when you read a novel and you're liking it, but you can sometimes feel a writer hedging their bets slightly and not quite sort of pushing, going for what they want to say.
You never get that with Muriel Spark.
Yeah.
She's just fearless in her writing. She's an art monster. I really love her.
We should say as well that you're releasing these books throughout the year.
Yeah.
And then eventually people can get the whole thing as a collection.
Yes. So we've done the first 4 in November. we're releasing Far Cry from Kensington in December, which is out of sequence. But the reason why we're doing that is because it's Radio 4's Book at Bedtime right on January.
Okay.
So, we want you to buy Far Cry from Kensington for that
cuddle
reason.
up with the Book at Bedtime.
Yes. And then we're doing 4 more in February, which is, oh God, am I going to do this in order? We're going to do Prime of Miss Jean Brodie, Girl of Slender Means, The Bachelors, and The Mandelbaum Gate in February. And then for each month after that, we're going to release 2 up until the festival, the book festival. And then they'll all be available by the time the book
will they?
festival hits.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I've got to pack my suitcase to get that, yeah.
Well, we are doing a deal on our website where you can buy the Year of Spark in a sort of subscription type thing where we post them out.
I think that's a good.
public.
I have to say that's a good way of doing it.
Yeah, so we post them out, and we've sold a fair few already.
Yeah.
Year of Sparks.
Yeah.
So we've got a lot of we're using a lot of brown paper and string and lots.
Excellent.
We've made these little labels to put on them. So yeah.
I should say as well, because I think a lot of people, if they've read any Spark like yourself, it would have been the Prime of Miss Jean Brodie. There is so much more out there. I mean,
Really?
there's even short story collections which are incredible. This was a writer, her whole life was writing, really. It was the right to the end.
And I'm really hoping that this year will garner more attention to the books that maybe people don't necessarily think of right away.
Yeah.
I mean, Loitering with Intent is amazing. Fleur Talbot is one of the best characters in 20th century literature.
There you go.
I kind of want to be her a little bit.
That's a sign of a good book, isn't it? Absolutely right, yeah. It's like wanting to live in Airdrie. Who thought a book could be able to do that? No offence. You mentioned there that Muriel Spark's going to be the subject of your next podcast. And we should say that you and Christian Kerr do The Hitchhiker's Guide to Scottish Literature.
Yeah.
Which I think is the best new podcast of the year. I've loved it.
Woohoo! Thank you very much for that.
I mean, I'm right in the audience for it, absolutely. But, I mean, you've already touched on Burns, you've done on Nan Shepherd, which is fantastic.
Yeah, she has been the discovery of the year for me. Because I hadn't read anything before we did that podcast.
Again, someone from part of Scotland that maybe, we didn't recognise the writers that came from them. And she was writing kind of Cairngorms and Aberdeen based.
Yeah, she was from the northeast. Lewis Grassic Gibbon country, as people call it now.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
She was right. I think she was friends with Lewis Grassic Gibbon, but Sunset Song has gone on to achieve wide knowledge, and Nan Shepherd just didn't. She completely disappeared for ages. Because it was funny, the story of The Living Mountain was, she wrote that in the 30s, but it was only first published in the 70s.
Yeah.
She just put it in a drawer. Because she had sent it to another writer, Neil Gunn, sort of saying, "What do you think about this? This is a little bit different." And he was kind of like, "Yeah, it's a bit too different." Whereas it was way ahead of its time.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah, and now it is one of the best books this country has produced.
It's kind of spiritual, and it is almost like a 70s book in many ways. They think of the land, but I suppose that links into Grassic Gibbon and his, the link between the people and the land and those that work on it or walk on it as she did.
But I went back to her novels as well, which are amazing too. The Quarrywood. There's a chapter in particular where the main character has just gone off to university, and she is just so excited about being in a place where she is free to just be alone with her brain and knowledge and getting it all. And I just think that it's a chapter and a section of a novel that should be sent to every single person who takes education for granted and thinks that it doesn't matter to people who don't get the experience of going to university or whatever.
Yeah.
It's astounding. I related very much to it in the way that, just the luxury of that time alone with your brain to develop it.
Well, exactly, which is what certainly secondary education, a lot of education was supposed to be, and then that gets cut off from people for all sorts of reasons.
Yeah, so yeah, definitely. And also just amazes me. I mean, I know she lived in the Northeast, she didn't really leave the Northeast, but why she is not considered in the same breath as the modernists of the period, I do not know.
No, exactly.
Like, she uses the exact same techniques and think like the interiority of the books and all that kind of thing that is completely classed with modernist writing, and yet, you know, you're lucky if you get Virginia Woolf mentioned, and then and she's the only woman.
Well, that's maybe
and
the point.
And so, and people think of modernism as quite an urban force as well, whereas
that's a very good point. I hadn't thought about that, but it is very much a kind of rural modernism that she's writing about.
Yeah, it just shows you how wide it actually was, the ideas that were coming around at that time, and yet again modernism gets, you know, boxed into this specific definition nowadays. So I'm glad that she's getting her due again. And
now you find her on your Fivers as well, which is odd.
Yeah, so a lot of the reason why I'm saying a lot that I've not read a lot of the contemporary Scottish books that came out this year is because this year has been spent reading a lot of backlist Scottish stuff because of the podcast. We conceived of doing it because of the 25th anniversary. We were like, let's just do something a little bit different.
Yeah.
Because what we do is we pair a classic Scottish text with a book and an author from Birlinn who is somehow connected to the theme or the content matter or anything from the book, to just sort of show that Birlinn books really are part of the cultural conversation that you can have about Scottish writing. And it's just been great reading all these Scottish writers who, you know, I did English literature at university, so I didn't read a lot of Scottish books when I was studying. So it's been great to discover these great writers who are not as well known as they should be.
And one of them, I mean, your last one was on John Buchan.
Yes.
And that's exactly a good example of that. You know, people know the 39 steps if they know him at all, but again, a hugely kind of influential and successful writer at the time. He was well known at the time.
Yeah. I can understand why some writers fall out of favour. And John Buchan is somebody that does seem quite rooted in that old school world of colonial Britain.
Yes,
and all that
very
kind
much
of thing.
so.
But that's not to say his books, even in a subtle way, question the wisdom of that, even as they purport to be quite sort of, even in a propaganda type way, about Great Britain fighting the...
There are aspects to them which make you a little bit uncomfortable as a modern reader. I think there's no doubt about that. However, he could spin a tale and get you to...
and some of it, particularly Sick Heart River, which was the one that we did for the podcast, is... It's like it's a 19th century person fighting to get into the 20th century. It was a really interesting book to read. And the fact that it was his last book makes it even more resonant in a way that you can see him sort of studying or thinking about his life and his thought processes behind his whole life and the way he's lived his life and worked and the framework in which that was in, and sort of maybe questioning that slightly. Yeah,
when the world changes and people find difficulty with that change, they don't quite understand it, why the things that they thought were so important or the standards that they had have shifted and can't quite get their head around that.
And there's also just really beautiful writing in Sick Heart River as well. He was a talented man.
Absolutely.
But
so
it was more the women that I discovered that intrigued me. Emma Tennant as well was somebody who I'd always wanted to get into.
Yeah, who I hadn't heard of and bought.
Because she died this year.
Oh, I didn't know
And
that.
like she had a couple of obituaries, you know, but you know there wasn't a big fuss about it.
Yeah.
And you know she was big news in the late 20th century, in the latter half of the 20th century, but she's kind of fallen out of favour. And her books are astounding. They very much fit into that whole anxious, you know, like Elizabeth Bowen or probably quite similar to maybe the character in Goblin or whatever, where, you know, violence is never... there's a strong undercurrent of violence in all the books that she's written, and it's tough reading, but it's good reading as well. It's reading that really gets your brain synapses firing.
And I mean, another one was Naomi Mitchison. You did one
Yes.
with Naomi Mitchison as well.
Yeah, I never realised the sheer amount of books that she's that she's written. So many, and also, you know, she chopped and changed styles all the time as well. She's more well known as a historical fiction writer, but she's actually done so much more. And she seemed like she lived a good life as well. Like, you know, when you read the biographies of these people, and you're kind of like, oh, that sounds good. You're at the centre of things, even though she lived in this grand house in the countryside. But, you know, she just seemed like a real 20th century creation, smack bang in the middle of all the important things that had happened.
So, I mean, you said you started doing the podcast partly to celebrate the 25th anniversary, but are you going to be keeping it going?
Yeah, we will be doing it. We'll continue. We've not decided what we're going to do next year. We're probably going to do fewer ones, because doing one a month,
I know,
while having a very challenging publishing job,
you got to read the book.
Yeah, well, and you don't only just read the book, but you read around the book as well.
You've got to think about it.
And so yeah, it's been quite a challenge doing it this year. It's been enjoyable, but we both decided that trying to do one a month was a bit too much. Yeah. So we'll still do them, but we'll do fewer next year. Yeah.
So what about next year? Forthcoming publications. What are you excited about?
Well, I'm obviously excited about Harlem 69 that we talked about earlier. Yes, absolutely. And the Sparks as well. Mm-hmm. We've got a new novel by Stuart David coming out. Peacock's Alibi.
Now, Stuart was on the podcast a wee while ago when he about his book In the All Night Cafe, which was about his time in Belle and Sebastian.
Oh, right, okay.
His early times in Belle and Sebastian. So
that was more of a memoir?
It is absolutely a memoir. It's a great read. It's just this, although, you know, getting the record out and becoming a success and the way that they did it and the way, it's an odd... He's slightly detached because, you know, he's no longer in the band and stuff like that. So it's all about the early years of Belle and Sebastian. Mm-hmm. But if you're into music at all, it's a great read. But he came on and did a podcast with us, and with Karen, his wife, and we spoke all about that and his time in Looper, as he is in now. But he also had an earlier novel called Nalda Said, which I reviewed many moons ago, which I highly recommend, and it shows his skill as a novelist, and I'm so pleased that you're putting out Peacock's Alibi.
Yeah, so Peacock Johnson is a character that he's wrote before.
Yes.
And this book, the premise of it is really is quite strange, because Peacock Johnson became a character in an Ian Rankin novel.
That's right.
And so the premise of this book is that Peacock Johnson, because of that Ian Rankin novel, is now much more under the eye of the local police. They because of that book, they think that Peacock Johnson is a much more of a hardened criminal than he actually is. Because really, what Peacock Johnson is, he's a bit of a wide boy chancer, like sort of get rich quick kind of guy, rather than a true sort of gangster. And what he wants to do is, start another get quick rich scheme, but instead he's accused of murder, which he's completely innocent of. Or is he? And so there's quite a sort of crime caper element to it as he tries to evade, being under the getting collared by the local policeman who's just on his case all the time and wants to frame him for this murder. So it's a crime book, but it's a funny book as well. Yeah. I
can imagine he's got a great sense of humour, which is not always easy to get down in my book, but I think he definitely manages to do it. So apart from Stuart, what else?
Well, talking about John Buchan, we published this year a brand new Richard Hannay series, obviously not written by John Buchan.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So following in the footsteps of things like the new Poirots and the new James Bonds and all that kind of thing, we've brought back Richard Hannay. Robert J. Harris wrote The 31 Kings, which was the book that he said Hannay might have written had he stayed alive during the Second World War, because it sees Richard Hannay taking it to the Nazis.
Yes.
And it's done really well. And then next year we're bringing out another one, but instead of it being a follow-up to that one, we go back in time a little bit, and it's the story that Buchan might have told after John McNabb.
Right.
But couldn't have told then because of its international political implications, because it stars the Kaiser Wilhelm.
Wow.
And again, it's just this really great romp of a novel. So he's been a pleasure to work with, and I'm really glad that the public have taken to the books in the spirit that they were done, because you can feel his love for the John Buchan adventure novels in his books. And then we're doing the North Coast Journey book. We are following up our amazingly popular 101 Gins book with 101 Rums.
Funny that, isn't it? It's a popular one.
I am more of a rum drinker than a gin drinker, so I am particularly looking forward to this one.
I was watching Peaky Blinders this week, and Tom Hardy's character says, gin makes you melancholy, but rum puts the fire in you. And I think you need more rum than gin at this moment in time.
Well, so see all of us. And it's coming in summer, folks. And then we're also doing this really lovely book. It's similar but different to the books that we've been talking about earlier, you know, like Your Good Immigrants and 404 Inks. And it's called A Human Love Story, and it's by a man called Matt Hopwood. And what he did was he travelled around Scotland. Well, he's travelled around the whole of the UK, but this book is particularly about his travels around Scotland, where he just talks to people about love.
Right.
And so he's got many stories about all different kinds of love from his travels going around Scotland, speaking to different people. So rather than it being like a sort of cause to champion and all that kind of thing, this is a book about the different kinds of love and how it affects your life and the stories it brings. And it's a much needed book, I think.
Yeah.
When, you know...
Sounds fascinating.
We're kind of turning on the news and thinking that love has disappeared from
love's
the
out of
public
fashion
sphere.
at the moment.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, so that's another book that we're looking forward to. I mean, there's loads, there's tons, because we publish a lot of books. We usually do around about 160 books a year. So, yes, those are a few of the highlights coming up.
Well, I think talking about love is the perfect place to finish.
Yes!
At this time of year especially. So, Vikki, thanks very much for doing this with us.
No problem.
And we'll be back in the new year, I think, with someone completely different. Yeah. Cheers.